This debate topic in the third in the series addresses the topic, can liberal democracy still thrive if mainstream society rejects organised religion? So Dr. Patrick will take the negative position and Dr. Breda will argue for the affirmative. So I have some statistics here about the decline of religious identification in Britain and in parts of Europe that perhaps introduce the importance or the relevance of this topic. So a 2014 poll suggested that just 8% of Britons regarded themselves as being very religious, and more than 60% suggesting that they were not religious at all. And interestingly, because we're talking about liberal democracy still thriving, in the same poll, more than half of the people surveyed suggested that religious identification was not more likely to make people moral. So that's an interesting perspective. In Scandinavia, 13% of Swedes describe themselves as religious, 16% as a seeker, and 24% as Christian, whilst 47% identify as secular. And since the 1960s, perhaps an increasing majority of the European population has ceased attending organised religious ceremonies or traditional religious practice on a regular basis, while still maintaining a relatively high levels of private individual religious beliefs, which Grace Davey in Rethinking Secularisation, A Global Perspective describes as believing without belonging. So that leads on to the debate topic, which I'll just repeat is, can liberal democracy still thrive if mainstream society rejects organised religion? So I'll hand over to the presenters.
Okay. Thank you very much, Katie. And that would be my turn to make the opening assertions. And my opening assertion is that certainly democracy, modern liberal democracy, can thrive without an organised, structured religious group or series of religious groups which are inserted in that particular community. The analysis of the statistical aspect of this debate are already been engaged and have been touched. And what I would like to draw your attention is that those institutions, those countries which were referred that, so we're speaking about England, we're speaking about Sweden, we're speaking about Denmark or Norway, they're all political and constitutional systems that do have an established church. They have an established church, but so in the past, there were strong connections between the level of identities, of the perception of identities, and the sense of belonging of a religious group. But now we know that that connections is not necessary to have a thriving democracy. It might have been so when those communities might feel threatened by other religious groups, and that, to some extent, is a caveat which I will deal later on. But in the modern Western-style democracy, the contributions of organized religions is not essential to the development of a liberal societies. I'm not saying that religious community do not contribute. That's not the case. We know that the contribution for the civil society is substantial. For instance, most part of aid or given to African countries in the area like idea of medical support is coming from the religious-based organizations. Okay, so I'm not saying that the religious groups do not contribute to a civil society. I do not, but what I'm saying is their activity or the activity of this organized group is not essential for the development of it. The narratives which is normally associated with the contributions of religious community and the modern liberal society has to do with the sense of belonging. So the identifications of individuals with other individuals, who might have very little to share with, might be linked to sharing a set of beliefs, so to be part of their communities. Now, that has been the case in most or part of European states, and to some extent, some of the political systems have been based on the assumptions that individuals were part of their religious group and they were also part of the state. But now we know that that connection is not essential. So most apart from Western style democracies in Western Europe, which are not being affected by dictatorship, which were preventing individuals to participate to religious groups. So speaking about the former communist country. So countries which are not being affected by this kind of persecution still thrive, even if the level of organized activity by religious groups is diminishing, and or is diminishing or is neglectable by comparison of the activities of other organized groups. And the most obvious organized activities which contribute to the public domain is the ones by political parties.
Well, I'll start by saying that we're engaging in speculation here, but the speculation is warranted because this is the first time in the last couple of decades we've seen in modern Western history liberal democracies where organized religion has declined in some countries in Western Europe to astonishingly low levels, to the point where church buildings are becoming apartment lofts and nightclubs and things like that, that adherence to organized religion and participation is at surprisingly low levels. And I think this is potentially problematic. I think that organized religion does fulfill a major role in liberal democracies. And it really starts from the bottom up in the sense that churches and mosques and synagogues and other religious institutions are one of the major avenues of social networks for individuals. It's where anybody can come, regardless of their background, and within a period of weeks and months, find friends, they can find support, whether it be food or economic support or counseling, other things like that. So it provides almost an instant social network for people. And then it's not just a social network like any other club or association because it has a moral principle behind it, and it expresses those moral beliefs. And the chain of moral guidance that religious organizations provide have historically been very important in Western liberal democracies. Now, sometimes we don't like what positions that those churches have taken, but still they are the expression of at least a moral view, an expression of principle, as opposed to democracies becoming this alienated collection of individuals who have no purpose beyond themselves, who are self-absorbed and have no reason to look at the civic good, at the common good. So churches play that role in gathering people together, assembling moral views, and expressing those views. And then religions, or organized religion, is quite important as one of the few forces that can stand against the ever-encroaching state. Because we know in Western Europe, many of the countries there are very statist. We know government continues to expand in many liberal democracies. And the organized religion can be one of those forces that has enough moral strength, enough moral principle to stand against that kind of creeping totalitarianism of statist governments.
So there are two elements there. First is the debate about individuals as atoms and the roles that the society, that religious has on putting those atoms together and to create a community. Now, the contributions, first of all, is the element about the debate about atoms. There is very few in modern liberal thinking that consider individuals as atoms, okay? So, and individuals as the only source of right and the political engagement. Most part of liberal Western democracies said, well, individuals make understanding of right and freedoms and morality is related to the group in which he or she is belonging. Now, so religions contributed to that because it created a network around individuals that might be a support network. But that network of individuals, instead to create a civic commitment to the entire community, tend to be, for the reason we just mentioned, based on dogmatic assumptions which basically seal that group. So when we have the debate, when we said we cannot have atoms, a society made of atoms, we cannot have a society made of religious groups because their conceptions of identity put the commitment of the transcendental before the commitment of the rest of the community, the constitutional system in which they are. So that there are positive and negative aspects of it. The positive aspect you mentioned, they said that they might provide a moral bearing, okay, in a situation in which the state take positions which might be not in the best interest of all individuals or amoral, okay? So they might take positions against the death penalty, the use of torture, the respect of human dignity. We have a great contributions, persistent contributions of religious communities on that area. But there is a negative aspect attached to it. They consider the rest of the community, the people outside the community, as not part or not as equal. So, or they create an artificial bubbles around themselves. And this, again, in the past, was the starting point for sectarianism and creating assumptions that certain group of individuals were more deserving of the rights that the liberal democracy were providing to the people outside of it. So the argument about atoms is also the argument against community. Religious community tend to create islands within the democratic society which might be detrimental to the development of modern liberal democracies. No, I think that's what I want to say about this.
Well, I guess my challenge to you would be, what's going to replace the contributions that religious organizations make in these countries where religion has declined so dramatically? What's going to replace the instant social network, social capital that religion provides? What's going to replace the charitable impulse that religion is a main driving force behind? If you think the Salvation Army, the Red Cross, so many charitable groups have religious origins. And you don't necessarily have to be religious to participate in those organizations, but that they have a moral view. So what is going to keep people from being atoms, from looking above themselves and looking out for civic good at a broader level?
Now, I'm not saying that the religion, I already mentioned this, I'm not saying the religions or organized religions are not made a substantial contribution to the formation of civil societies. What I'm saying is that the contribution comes with the dark shadow, and that dark shadow is linked to an historical past of sectarianism. And all modern Western European countries went through that process of sectarianism. In fact, the modern structure of the European state is based on the assumptions that there must be a connection between set of beliefs and the state. That connections has diluted over the times, and yet those democracies managed to flourish. Okay, so even if there is some anachronism, so there are still strong connections, and there are established churches in most part of Northern Europe. Southern Europe moved to the secular systems, but most part of Northern Europe still make a connections or recognize a connection between the structure of the state and an established church. The society moved away from that connections and is still thriving. They are particularly in area like social democracies, those countries which were mentioned in the statistics. So we're speaking about Sweden, Norway, or Denmark, produce the high quality, high level of civil engagement and distributive policies, which look after for those who are less fortunate in societies, even though those group of individuals do not make a reference to organized religions anymore. So I think civic society will take over the debate to the vacuum left by organized religions, and they will take it over without making those prescriptions, which are more or less embedded or being part of organized religions.
Well, some of the countries you mentioned, Sweden and Denmark, are good examples, are largely homogenous. The population largely comes from a shared religious past, even if the religious affiliation today it does not manifest. But I think we can usefully contrast that with England, where there's also been this decline in religion, but there's also been major public issues centered around immigration, centered around xenophobia, centered around clashes between Muslims and the somewhat apathetic Christian mainstream, that you can see where organized religion does have a role in bringing people in and bringing people together. And if there is no organized religion, what is left to make those connections between people? And yes, liberal democracy will still exist, but is it thriving? And I don't know if we would say it's thriving in England in the same way we might say it is in other countries around the world.
Oh, okay. So the first thing is we have to make a distinction between the Scandinavian countries. So Denmark certainly has the traditions of being a uniform ethnic populations. Okay, the other country which can have the similar claim is Japan. Okay, these are the two countries which, from the ethnic perspective, are very autonomous. And the other countries, so both Sweden and Norway, have minorities, and they are also being quite interesting debate about the role of minorities, both the Swami minorities and minorities from the other countries, the other Scandinavian countries there. It's less so in Denmark. Yet, those countries still have policies of immigrations and acceptance of refugees, which make them the envy of most of other liberal democracies, in the sense they are open societies, and saying that the fact that they don't have an impact of organized religions in those countries might create problems for the acceptance of diversities, I think cannot be proven. In fact, is the other way around. The fact that individuals who are coming from different religious background can come to places in which religions, organized religions, do not have such a strong view. So to put this in context, the debate over young Australians who went to Syria or to Iraq to fight for a religious group, for part of the ISIS, and then they were risking, but first they risked to lose their citizenship, and then they may risk to be put in prisons in Australia. However, in Denmark, they were accepted. And the only debate is whether their roles as fighters or religious fighters were not comparable to the Danish troops who were sent to do similar activities. And that gives an indication to the level of tolerance and openness of a society which has a very a soft in a society which do not suffer the impact of a large group of organized religions.
Well, I'll say you make a very persuasive case. You may have persuaded me right now, but I think we agree this is speculative. We have a very limited data set of countries to evaluate in a very limited time frame so far to see where the future of organized religion and liberal democracy will come together. Thank you.
Thank you very much. No, thank you very much.
Thank you. And I forgot to mention earlier as well that, of course, the views expressed are not necessarily those of the presenters or of the University of Southern Queensland. So I'll open it up for questions.
Jeremy, Dr. Patrick, your main argument seems to be that religions act as a magnet, so to speak, for social interaction and networking. That's sort of making the assumption that the religion is the cause or the only possible outlet. I can't give any quotes or references or citations. Humans are primates. We're social species. Vast majority of, especially primates, but social species in general, do have social activities. I mean, this is part of human nature, with or without religious or theistic focal point to act as a magnet. What I'm saying is that whether it's a religion or not, there will be social focal points for any society. That seems to me reasonable, although I cannot express it quite as clearly as it is in my head.
Yes, well, I think you're right that there's always going to be social focal points or social connections.
That was
a
statement. The question is, why does that necessitate religion or theism?
And that's where religion is only one type of the social networks you mentioned, or the possibilities, but it's a special type because churches and mosques and other organized religious groups provide something more than joining a sports team or the friends you make at work, that they offer not just friendship, but also social capital and support. That at many of these institutions, if you run low on cash one week, they'll help you out with a temporary loan. They'll help you out by providing food or temporary accommodation. That you have a spiritual connection that is greater than, in theory at least, the connections one will make elsewhere. So when you move to a new city, yes, you can make friends by joining a amateur basketball team or something like that. But by joining a church, you've almost instantly made these connections that you won't find in other contexts. And similarly, that's why when immigrants come to Australia or many other countries, they end up coalescing around the local mosque or the local synagogue or the local religious institution, because that's where they will find like-minded people who will support them and will help them make their way in a new world or a new country. So I do think religious organizations offer a type of social network that cannot be, that there is no secular equivalent, or at least not a common secular equivalent.
Does not imply will never be.
Well, that's possible, and it's possible in England or in Denmark. There are secular organizations that can or in the future will replace churches, but I don't know what they are, and I don't know what they would look like. I don't know what shared moral view would hold them together or allow them to influence government policy in a way that organized religion can.
Are there any questions over this side? All right. Well, again, I will ask, did anyone change their mind as a result of the arguments presented today? Yes? One. We're getting, if we kept on with sort of 10 debates, 10 debates, we might get, we'll keep everyone here until they change their mind. Well, thank you very much for coming and listening to the debates. Did you want to introduce the next?
Yes, I'll do a couple of quick plugs. First of all, next week, Katie will be doing a research seminar on the role of ethics in Christian lawyers and how they navigate between the legal and the religious spheres of life. And then at the end of the month, former High Court Justice Kirby will be visiting USQ, and we hope you participate and attend his public lecture.
Okay.
Thank you
very much.